Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live. Which U.S. startups do people most want to work at right now? We're revealing the 50 most resilient young companies you'll want to send your resume to, and they are all hiring. Then we sit down with Brooklyn & co-founder Rich Fulop, along with investor and former manager to artists like Lady Gaga and John Legend, Troy Carter. That, our poll of the day, and more coming up now on LinkedIn News Live. Hello, everyone. I'm Susie Jackson, and welcome to LinkedIn News Live. It's where the business conversation begins. LinkedIn released its annual top startups list this morning, a ranking of the young companies where America wants to work. Startups have faced headwinds because of the pandemic, and this year's list reflects companies that have remained resilient and found ways to pivot and even thrive in this environment. Before we dig into the list and give some context around the 50 companies that ranked, we want to hear from you. What questions do you have about our list today? Drop them into the stream as we go, and we'll get them answered today on the live show. We already have a lot of members joining in. Hello to some of you in the stream. We have Natalie from Ohio, Dolores from Dallas. Great to have you on the program this morning. And now we want to get right into it. Joining me now are LinkedIn's editor-at-large, Caroline Fairchild, and LinkedIn senior editor-at-large, Jesse Hempel. Welcome to the show.
Hey.
Caroline, let's get started with you today. How is this list put together?
Yeah, so this list is really a partnership that comes from our data science team here at LinkedIn and then our editors around the world. And here in the US, we look at the actions of the 171 million members that we have on LinkedIn to put together this list. And to be eligible for the top startups list, your company has to be 7 years or younger. You have to have at least 50 employees, be privately held, and also be headquartered here in the US. And this list, we're 4 years into making this list. It's really a great predictor of the biggest startups to come. Snowflake, which was #1 on the list last year, just went out for a record IPO. And when we think about the methodology, we're looking at 4 main pillars for this list. So we're thinking about how fast is this company growing? How much are job seekers interested in working there? And then we look at how people are on LinkedIn are engaging with the company. Are they going to their LinkedIn profile? And then how well are these companies recruiting from LinkedIn's top companies list, which includes companies like Apple, Amazon, Bank of America, Deloitte. How are these startups recruiting talent from those big companies?
Okay, so I know that there are 50 companies on this list. Jesse, I want to know which ones stuck out to you.
Well, far and above anything else this year, I noticed how many healthcare companies we have on this list. We have 7, which is 6 more than we had last year. And I guess it's not really a surprise. I mean, you take the healthcare industry, and traditionally it has been slow to make changes. There are so many regulations around data, and healthcare companies traditionally don't love trying new things. But of course, the pandemic has changed all of that. And you see not 1, but 2 online pharmacy companies that deliver this year, for example. You see companies like Modern Health and MindStrong that are focused on mental health. And then you see also just a number of companies that are steering into the pandemic that are offering COVID tests and the like.
So no surprise, like you said, seeing a lot of healthcare companies burgeoning on the list. I want to say hi to a few more members joining us. We have Bill from Greece. Welcome, Bill, to the show. Tim from New York and Harry from Orlando joining us today. Jesse, let's stay with you for a moment and keep talking about trends. What are some of the key business trends of this year's list?
So many trends. And I would love, if you're joining us on the stream, I would love to see what you are seeing in terms of trends. I know another thing that really stuck out for me was just how many online community gathering opportunities exist on our list. So you have things like Masterclass or Guild Education, certainly. You have PVolve, which is fitness. But you know what underlines all of these things, because of course fitness was big beforehand, education was big beforehand, is that it's happening online, that people are actually finding substantive ways to create community online. And that is really key this year.
So we're talking about companies finding new ways to reach their customers. Caroline, I want to talk about the people who are leading some of those companies. What is the makeup of our founders on the list? What do we know about them?
Sure. So Susie, as usual, this list is a reflection of the startup ecosystem, which unfortunately remains largely white and largely male. But in reporting for this year's list, I found that the venture capital industry, as well as lots of startup founders, they want to change that. This list was put together under the backdrop of protests around the country against systemic racism. I spoke with over a dozen Black founders who are saying that they are seeing things change incrementally throughout the industry and that they're having conversations with VCs that they haven't had before. And so what I would say is that this list is a reflection of the ecosystem right now, but I think what we're hoping is that moving forward, we'll see a more diverse makeup.
So hoping that we're going to see more diversity in the future. Jesse, I want to talk more about things that we're going to see in the future here. This list often points to larger industry trends, in this case in hiring. What industries are leading on the list?
Well, it's no surprise on a top startups list that the internet and software companies dominate, and they do. Half of our list is internet and software companies, but this year we're seeing other industries really gain steam. We're seeing healthcare and medical. 10% of our companies are from that industry. And then also finance. Of the 3 companies at the top of our list, 2, Better.com and Robinhood, come from finance.
So we've got some members from some of these top startups joining us in the stream today. I want to say hello to Will, who's from number 4 on the list, Samsara, and Brittany says hello from Quibi. So welcome to LinkedIn News Live. Caroline, let's talk about the geographical breakdown of this list. Where are most of these companies based?
I don't think it's going to be a surprise to most people on the stream, but a majority of nearly half of the startups on the list are based in San Francisco. If you think about Sand Hill Road down in Palo Alto, that's where a majority of these checks are being cut. Other than that, you're seeing a lot of startups from New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Boston. But Susie, we've been putting together this list for 4 years. And what I'll say is that while the coasts seem to dominate every year, incrementally we're seeing change and we're seeing more startups, they come out of Austin. So geographical diversity and distribution is changing as well.
It is a big year for change. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Susie.
And Jesse, don't go anywhere. You'll be speaking with Brooklyn and co-founder Rich Fulop and investor and founder Troy Carter in just a moment.
I'm really looking forward to that.
But first, we want to check in on our poll today. We've been asking professionals on the LinkedIn news page, and we want to hear from you as well. What do you think is the strongest opportunity for startups in the years ahead? You can tell us by voting in the stream. You could say A for virtual community and spaces, B, telehealth solutions, C, delivery and access, or if your answer is D, something else, tell us what that is. Give us some context about your thoughts. Just drop those right in the stream. And Jesse is going to be back to read the results at the end of the show. Meanwhile, our top startups lists are done in various countries around the world. My colleague Natalie McDonald takes us across the Atlantic for the latest business trends in the APAC region.
LinkedIn's top startups list can be found in 14 countries around the world, including Australia, India, Japan, and Singapore, ranking the emerging and most resilient startups right now. Let's take a look at some of the APAC trends amongst this year's honorees. We start down under, where a challenging financial climate has pushed consumers to look beyond traditional lenders, turning instead to challenger banks such as Judo Bank, Volt Bank, and Zinja, who make the list for the second year running. Let's go across the pond to Japan, where startups are taking a digital-first approach. AI technology is emerging in industries like education and healthcare, and phrases like contactless, remote, and automation are all part of the pandemic response, with the likes of ExaWizards and Cogent Labs leading the way. Heading to Singapore, where a variety of health and wellness-focused startups have shown resilience to the pandemic, like 3D printed invisible braces provider Zenium, or Secret Lab, which makes gaming chairs, and Homage, an on-demand elderly care app matching seniors with professional caregivers. And let's not forget India, where e-learning companies have capitalized on tailwinds from the pandemic with their deft moves. Online higher education platform Upgrad takes the top spot, followed by e-mentorship marketplace Unschool and test prep platform Unacademy. What do these firms have in common? By adapting swiftly to the realities of the pandemic, adjusting to consumer trends, and leveraging new technology, these companies have cemented their place as top startups across the APAC region. What are the emerging trends where you live?
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to LinkedIn News Live. I'm LinkedIn Senior Editor-at-Large, Jessie Hempel, and we're talking about our top startups list. You know, before we talk about the companies on this year's list, I have to be clear. None of them saw 2020 coming. Not like this. First, there's a global pandemic that grounds business to a halt. Then comes a recession and major civil unrest. Protesters continue to demand that our society address its institutionalized racism at every level. There is no clear or easy path through any of this. Whatever founders and leaders thought they'd be doing this year, most have had to rethink their plans entirely. And my next two guests have done a great job at that. Today we have Troy Carter. He's a music talent manager and CEO of Q&A, and Rich Fulop is co-founder of New York-based Brooklinen. Welcome to the show, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, Jesse.
Well, so let's start with you, Troy. You're both an investor and also a founder. If we were having this conversation at the start of the year, what would you have laid out as your priorities in 2020?
Wow, definitely didn't see any of this coming. But, for us, we're launching software for the music industry. So distribution software, basically, which, luckily, our business wasn't dependent on like the live music sector or anything like that. But, to see the industry get crushed on the live side the way it has, the silver lining is that streaming has done extremely well. And our software business is centered around streaming. But so our priorities still stay the same. But, I think the bigger priority was just making sure that our team was safe, most of them at home with their families, and that and also just from a mental health perspective, that they were in a good place as well. So just the priority shifted from company-driven priorities to people-driven priorities.
Troy, I'm so glad you started there. And I heard that from so many founders as I was talking to founders on our list that need to take care of your people in a different way. And we'll get to that a little bit later in our conversation. But first, Rich, I want to kick it off. I want to throw off to you. If we'd gotten together in, I don't know, say January, how would you have laid out your priorities and how have they shifted?
Our world was turned upside down really, really quickly. We came into this year, we were in the middle of a fundraise, which kicked off at the end of last year, and we were hoping to close January or February. We ended up closing that round of funding mid-February, pretty much a day before the market started to take a turn, and the COVID period that we're in really started to sink in for us. So that was a curveball. And part of that fundraising was for some team expansion, but also retail expansion. We've done a lot of testing in the last few years about what retail looks like for our business. Obviously, we're heavily e-com, and we've been that way for 6 years, but we've tested into a model that we were confident works and opened our first store actually in January. So we had plans for actually 3 more this year, 1 per quarter. We put those on the shelf and actually doubled down and refocused on our e-com business and team expansion to support all the variety of initiatives that kind of shown their face, as the year has gone on. And you've touched on a few in the last few minutes.
Rich, I just want to underscore that for a second. Y'all opened your first physical store in January.
In January.
Did you close it?
No, I mean, we closed it for a while. We ended up reopening with some new rules and regulations and kind of a new customer experience that's more of like a kiosk at front. And now we have allowed people to come in with some crowd control at the front. And it's very interesting and flattering to see a line outside the store on the weekends, which was something we didn't expect, but it's just because of capacity issues and whatnot. The store is actually doing well. We've seen different behavior, which is actually like flipping the script for us on how we're thinking about the expansion in terms of square footage and locations and everything that goes along with that, because people are coming in with intent. I don't think people are really, going to browse, stroll, window shop anymore. You're going to transact. So we're trying to build an experience around that as well for the future. So it's actually given us an opportunity to observe and pivot as needed.
It'll be really interesting to see where that goes over time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Troy, you're an experienced founder. We've spoken a lot about the many businesses you've found and talent that you have launched over time. I'm curious if you've gleaned anything from those earlier experiences that have set you up well to handle the kind of crises we've seen this year.
Yeah, like I said before, I don't think anybody was prepared for the level and the sort of back-to-back crises. But, as a talent manager in the music industry, I think part of our job is having to manage, various crises. And, I think as a young talent manager, having to figure out how to get hundreds of people home after 9/11, after when we had artists out on tour, it kind of gave me the confidence of being able to solve problems. And, I have that personality of, I'm the person that you want in the foxhole with you, as you're going through things. But with this, I think it's unprecedented. So I think a lot of people are just figuring out things, but for the first time. I've never had to shut down an office for 6 months before and have everybody work remotely and figure out how to keep people motivated and productive. And that actually COVID and dealing with that crisis was probably easier than even dealing with everything around George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, because COVID affected everybody equally. And then sort of moving into the crisis around George Floyd, it's just different feelings, and people responded in different ways. So it was a lot, but so far we've done well being able to manage through it.
And Troy, it sounds like what you're saying is really resonating for the people on our stream right now. We have Aga from the stream who says, "I'm so glad to hear that you talk about shifting your priorities towards people, Troy." And I'm glad to hear too you spell out that we had different crises, and those crises called on us at different times to be leaders in different ways over the course of the last year. Now, Troy, in addition to being a founder, you are an investor. I've talked to you many times about the investments that you have made. What are you seeing in the investment landscape? I know when I talked to founders, they reported that kind of at the beginning of this, there was a question mark over whether money would be available, and people were nervous about that. Now things have changed. Are you seeing your companies able to raise? Are you actively out making investments yourself?
Yeah, I'm still active. I don't know if it was, at some levels, money, it was that uncertainty that was there, but I just don't think it was the appropriate time for people to be out pitching. As people are trying to figure out, how to manage their families and teams and, their existing portfolio companies. So I think just for founders not to come across tone deaf and pitch people during that time was probably the most important thing. But I think once people got settled, and for me, like I needed a sense of normalcy back in my life. So I started listening to pitches, a few months in. I've probably done 3 investments over that period of time since March, about 3 or 4. But we're still in it, and I know people are closing funds right now and companies that have been funded. So it's back to normal in that space.
Well, Rich, you closed your most recent fund investment right really before the pandemic got started. So has you spoke about this a little bit earlier on, but like how have your priorities changed around how to use that investment?
Yeah, I touched on it before. I mean, a lot of it has gone into team expansion and really doubling down on our e-com experience. And honestly, the most important thing, which is unspectacular to a customer or a viewer, is actually supply chain security. So with that, we need duplication of our supply chains pretty much in every product line, and we've had a concerted effort to do that just for protection, because as this thing rips through the world, every single country's reacted differently. Every single supplier for us, really, in terms of their capacities. Some are on lockdown, some aren't, depending where they are in the world. So really shoring that up and focusing away from those other channel expansions that I mentioned before, and more on the team, on redundancies in here to really handle the expanded bandwidth that we need. Because where we in a world where we had 3 supply chains, which we have far more than that. But for example, if we had 3, now that looks like 9, because we have 3 for each product line, just to protect the business on that. So more operational focused for sure, and team management, really. As Troy said, this is unprecedented, and while COVID affects everybody the same, a lot of the civil unrest has affected many people very differently. So managing that as a leader has been very challenging and educational for me personally as well.
That makes a lot of sense, Troy. That makes a lot of sense, Rich. I want to just check in on our members on the stream. We've got a lot of folks saying hello. So hello's back to Ariel and Andrea from Florida, to Diana from Chicago, Manal from London, and Michael from Texas. Elisa asks, I'd like to know how much time they waited before asking for capital. And that question goes to Troy.
Um, I would say it was a few months before I started. I think it was a couple of tone deaf people that reached out like at the top of it, which in all fairness, I think when a founder has needs and and desperation to save the company, I don't blame you. Just to be honest with you, but I think it was probably harder then. But a few months in, I think it's just a timing and a feel thing, and also just it may depend geographically where you are and what's happening at that particular time. But I just would say just use best judgment, and do a little bit of homework on who you're pitching and whether they're making investments at that particular time.
Well spoken. I want to go back to something that you said, Rich. You were talking about the supply chain, and it got me thinking about the number one fundamental thing that people take for granted about your products is that they arrive in a timely fashion, that's
Yep.
part of the delight of the product, and that when that goes wrong, your customers are pretty angry about it. And I imagine that it just takes so much more work right now, both to get that right and to communicate with customers about that challenge.
Totally. It's been very complicated, honestly. We are building the aircraft as we're in midair, as I like to say, for our team over here. And as things change very, very rapidly, it actually just rips through the entire organization. For example, as hospitality and travel have pulled back marketing budgets through the pandemic, it's opened up opportunity for other marketers that may be smaller than them, such as us, to market. While marketing is efficient, the expectations of the customers don't necessarily change. So we've had to beef up our customer service needs and, as I said, our supply chain needs, fulfillment needs to make sure everybody is healthy on the warehouse side, because there was really no margin for error for us on that. If people weren't healthy and tested, then one sickness would affect our entire fulfillment operation. So luckily we avoided that, and we have multiple fulfillment facilities, as I said, for duplication. So there's been a lot of complexity, but the changing waters over here have really thrown curveballs through the entire organization, and just balancing and juggling all that at the same time has been very challenging, to say the least, for lack of a better word.
I love that analogy of building the airplane as you're following it. And just to stay with you a second, Rich, unlike for Troy, this is your first company that you have founded and grown. Where do you figure out how to do this? Are there mentors? Are there people you ask for advice? How are you figuring this out?
Yeah, well, this is an unprecedented time, so nobody has like specific experience around this. That's first and foremost. But what I've sought out is people that are in the same situations and dealing with similar things in leadership capacity. So business is one thing, but also leading the people and getting the trust of people is another thing, and executing on that front. For me, I have a wide variety of mentors, albeit from school or for previous jobs in my career, but I also lean on my network of other CEOs as well, because they're going through a lot of the same things, different businesses, different scale, but it's all very, very similar problems. And last, actually, my brother is the mayor of a city, and he actually has a very large team that he has to manage, very remote, as well as police departments, fire departments. So there's really no sympathy for me managing my team from him, because it's way more complex. So it's good to gut check and to get advice from my older brother as well, who has similar complexities, but very, very different at the same time.
Rich, am I hearing you say, yeah, well, my brother has it even harder? Is that what?
Yeah, kind of. So it kind of puts me in my place, in that it's hard to cry to him, but I can brainstorm with him and how he's handling things, and it's hard to run a city remotely.
I have to imagine, and I want to talk about that remote piece. I mean, first I have to ask you, will you tell us what city he runs?
It's Jersey City, New Jersey.
Jersey City. So if we have listeners on the stream from Jersey City, weigh in. Let us know that you're there. But I want to talk about this remote work piece, because many different companies had to go remote all of a sudden, fairly abruptly. Now, startups have long had sort of a head start on that, because a lot of startups have been willing to accommodate remote workers a lot more frequently. I think that was a little bit different for each of you. Rich, I know your team was actually a very in-person team. A lot of it was very in-person before the pandemic. Troy, were you guys already a remote team?
Not really. We had a few people working remotely, and the music industry is definitely office culture, and because artists want to come into your physical space, and So the idea around space is almost existential for the music industry. And what we figured out, I had a lot of anxiety about working remotely, and Thursday was actually our last day with even a physical office. So we'll be 100% remote moving forward with our team. Because what I saw was that people actually were more productive, more communicative. And then when I thought about sort of cost of living for people, quality of life for people as well, it was almost unanimous from our team that we would go 100% remote moving forward. So we're giving it a shot.
Wow, 100% remote. That is quite a vote of confidence in the remote culture. Rich, the thing that was most interesting to me about your situation is just how much of your headcount you've actually added since the pandemic. You have brought in something like 25% of your employees have joined while you were remote. And I'm curious how, as a founder, you communicate culture and get everybody to feel like they're on the same team in that kind of landscape.
To tell you the truth, Jesse, it's really, really hard. That's been the biggest challenge for me by far. The culture we've cultivated within the business and the organization is the most important thing to Vicky and I as we started the company. We wanted to create an environment that our team was excited and happy and proud to come to work to. And that's 360 degrees really when they're here, as well as when they're talking about it to people outside of work. To really replicate that in a Zoom world is quite difficult. We do a lot of activities to the best that we can. We've done scavenger hunts on Zoom where people have to find things in their house. We do trivia once a week. We obviously do happy hours in smaller breakout groups. Now, integrating those people to our company culture and what we do normally has been tough, but coffee chats, breakfast, the best we can is try to replicate that real life experience. What we have lost though, and what you really, really can't bring back is that water cooler talk or in the kitchen or on the way to and from the bathroom when you pass somebody, you're just talking about, what was on TV or a podcast. Now it's very much Zoom business, and those meetings that are networking and, to meet and greet, they're specific for that. They're not as casual. So trying to normalize that has been a challenge, but, we've hired as needed and really accelerated as the business has accelerated this year. We happen to be in the right categories for everyone staying at home, very fortunately. So our business has done quite well. And, I and, our whole team are very, very fortunate for the circumstances, but we've actually had to fuel that along the way.
Which our bench channel on Slack at our office, I found better shows on there on our channel than at the water cooler now.
Yeah, it's just a different forum for it. We're all.
I get all of the good shows now.
Yeah, you gotta do a follow up on that. Over the course of the day to catch up on what everyone's doing, specifically on Mondays. Yeah,
I think that's so true. I think it's like a both and, you guys. It's like, I can see arguments for a remote culture, and maybe over time we're actually going to get it even better and figure out how to build in the casual interstitial stuff. Mm-hmm. And I can also see the hunger that many of my colleagues have for being with each other again at the office. Yeah. And Troy, Rich, I hope we have you here together in a year, because you're making slightly different bets on this, and I'll be really interested to see sort of how it turns out, how it unfolds. But we're getting ready to close out here, and so I want to ask each of you, if you had one piece of advice for a founder going through this year at the beginning of the year, what would you give us? And either of you can begin.
Advice for founder? Sorry.
Yeah.
It just, there are a lot of books written by founders, but there's no book written like specifically how to found and navigate a company, because every single one is different, and it's basically like a living organism, and it grows and it shrinks and it changes over time. So it's really about taking it, know what your goals are, know what your values are, and think big picture, and just whittle away, a day, an hour at a time. Just make sure you're making progress on that track, because these things, it's a huge honor to be on this list, and it definitely wasn't built overnight. Or, for us, it took. I think the saying is it took 6 years to become an overnight success for us, in our case. So it just takes time and patience and perseverance, regardless of the circumstances.
Rich, I love that, goals and values as your North Star.
Mm-hmm.
How about Troy?
I would just say, in this moment, just that idea around, and this too shall pass. I think being able to stay positive, being able to keep your team engaged, and being extra communicative. Whether that's with your co-founders, whether that's with your mentors, whether that's with your board or investors, your entire team, but just being as communicative as possible.
That idea of being communicative, it's so critical. And Troy, one of my favorite things about you as a founder and an investor is your ability to hold the positive, to stay positive all the time. And you're right, that is so critical this year. I want to thank you guys both for spending this time with us. It was really helpful and enjoyable to all of us. And I hope to have you on the show again at a future time. Thanks.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, thanks.
Now, we have a bunch of people still weighing in from the stream. It's great to see you there. Mariano says, the post-pandemic year shall reinforce even more the tech startups. And Donna says, startups add fuel to the economy. You are right about that, Donna. I also want to bring back our poll of the day. We have been polling people on the platform, and we asked you too. We said, what do you think is the strongest opportunity for startups? 36% of you, just more than a third, said virtual community and spaces. 27% of you went with B, telehealth solutions. 32% of you, roughly even, just a little less than a third, said C, delivery and access. And then 5% of you are sitting on the fence. You say other, D, other. Professionals on the LinkedIn news page. And here we have heard those results. We want to hear a little bit from you. And it looks like you guys share a little bit of a different view on this. For A, virtual spaces, we have Colleen, Eric, and Deborah saying, yeah, I think that. Telehealth solutions have Roy, Andy, Pardeep, Beth, and Shri. But then shipping and delivery, Sudhir, Michelle, Willie, Vikash, Elisa, Harry, they say customers are looking for service ways to deliver faster and more efficiently for their customers. Thank you all for submitting your answers on the platform and in the stream. And remember, you can find the list and more from us by checking out the LinkedIn news module to the right of your news feed on your desktop or on mobile by clicking into your search box. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking to Vishal Garg, the CEO of Better, the #1 company on the top startups list. And the founder of Guild Education, Rachel Carlson, will also join us. You won't want to miss it. Thank you all for joining on LinkedIn News Live.